Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Turner, but you can call me Wolf, and a lot of people know me from Paranormal Roundtable. This is going to be our new project. This is the first episode of what we're calling True Crime Paranormal. I really hope you enjoy these episodes as much as I do making them. I really enjoy making paranormal episodes for Paranormal Roundtable. This is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be dark at times. And I hope you have the stomach for it, because some people don't. And I'm just going to have to put a little disclaimer there. Not only does it get dark, but this is dealing with people who have unalived people, really, really bad people who've done really, really bad things. My point to this, as a side project, starting as a side project for Paranormal Roundtable, was to delve deep, just like we do on the other shows, into the psyche of these people, what makes them tick, but going a little bit deeper than that. Was there a paranormal explanation to this? Can the paranormal be explained, and can it be used to explain this? And that's another question in of itself. What I like to do whenever I come across some of these villains, these devious people who've done these things, is psychoanalyze these people, not just mentally, but spiritually. And do a rundown of what makes these people tick. And like I said, not just mentally, but spiritually. What was causing it? What was driving it? And was it something demonic that was behind this? And why is it so prevalent in our society today? Those are the questions that I want to get answered in some form or another. Maybe we'll find them, maybe we won't, but we will at least try. And that's what I want to do with this project. Welcome to the first episode of True Crime Paranormal. And right now I want to introduce my co-host. We call her Rain. And then my other co-host, we call her Madeline. But, you can call them whatever you want. I don't really care. Just focus on me. I'm the most important person in this. I'm very special. A lot of people like me. I'm joking, kidding. I'm messing around. But anyway, you get my point. Also, we have with us in the studio, Anthony, who's my perennial, as always, my perennial co-host on Paranormal Roundtable. And if you haven't subscribed, like and subscribe, please, to this channel. This is our first episode, and I know it's going to be fine. But I know I still can't help but be a little bit nervous because I want this to go well. But that's up to you, the audience, to decide. Remember, we have Paranormal Roundtable, and we have Dead Zone Transmissions. Dead Zone Transmissions is a new channel that's only been out for about a month and a half at this point. And we have Paranormal Roundtable, which has been out for a long time, going on 8 years. And this has been a dream of mine to make another channel and have it be as successful as Paranormal Roundtable. Will that happen? I don't know. But like all the other questions we hope to answer, I guess maybe that's one that we'll figure out too. So let's get started. The first episode, and this is just kind of like, the popularity of Ed Gein at this point. Like there's been like this. The show came out, what was it, on Netflix? And everybody's been talking about Ed Gein, so it brought it back to the forefront of everybody's psyche. Like, oh yeah, there was this guy back in the day that kind of started all of these other lunatics, right?
Yep.
But there were others before him. People don't really, they kind of look at this guy kind of like the beginning, right?
Right. He inspired just so many kind of movies. He really had a big cultural impact. But like you said, there were more before him, but for obvious reasons, his really stuck out.
Yeah, when I think of him, I think of Psycho, because Hitchcock was big into using him as the template, for Mother, Mother, I didn't do this, Mother. And we know people who are like that in real life. But this guy, I'm telling you, like it is like he spawned that, and then Leatherface.
Yeah, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, yeah.
But when you look at those two characters, it's very interesting what Tobe Hooper, and of course Tobe, he did that at the University of Texas. My grandparents used to have a cleaning service years ago, and the UT was one of their accounts. And temporarily, my mother and father worked there, and they remember talking to the cast and Tobe, and my dad even got to handle the chainsaw. And then later on, my dad actually, when I was a child, my dad's friend lived in that house, which would be now where the La Frontera shopping center is. It's gone now, that house. It's been moved to Kingsland. And most recently, about a year ago, me and Nellie went there last winter, and we went and, sat in. There's a restaurant now, whatever, and explored. But I slept in that house when I was a child, and it was funny that my dad was like, you don't remember that, you were really small, but I do remember vaguely being in that house and like playing with a toy truck with one of my dad's friend's children. And my dad said when he was young, like right before I was born, because I was little bitty, but my generation, we actually remember our childhoods. But my dad said that he remembers sleeping there and having a nightmare and thinking some guy was going to jump out with a chainsaw.
I bet he did.
The interesting thing about that is that Leatherface was the physical manifestation of Ed Gein. The wearing of the skin, and
right.
He was basically Ed Gein's physical manifestation. And then when you look at Psycho, Norman Bates was the mental break. He was the mental psychosis of Ed Gein. That's kind of who he was mentally, And then I kind of look at those as, two different. Of course, there's a little bit of mental in Ed Gein and a little bit of physical but for the most part, those are the same character, but just two different aspects of who he was. And I believe that there were many different aspects to this guy, so we're going to get into that. I'm going to start with this. I have a couple questions for you ladies because I know you guys have been doing some research on this guy. When was he born?
He was born August 27th, 1906, on Plainfield, Wisconsin, where he lived and died. I mean, he was just isolated on his family's farm, so never really lived anywhere else, worked odd jobs after his mom died to kind of make ends meet, doing handiwork, babysitting, which that kind of blew my mind. When I saw that, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, because that was one of his jobs.
Yep.
Now, I know that people will probably remember, it's probably fresh in everybody's minds, the Netflix series. Anthony, you watched it, didn't you?
Yeah, I watched it.
Yeah. Okay, so I remember watching it. I don't think I caught all because I was falling asleep because I work a lot. I don't babysit. But I just remember like him babysitting, and I remember reading about him a long time ago, and I thought it was crazy that he was a babysitter. And like I thought, what? When I first read that,
oh yeah,
it was shocking to me. And then of course they did their own little spin of it on the Netflix series, but that was not a legitimate, true retelling of who or what this guy was.
Oh yeah, I mean TV shows, of course, they always got to add stuff and dramatization. But one thing you have to remember about Ed Gein is people were pretty shocked when they found out about these murders. He was described as being very calm, odd, but polite and very childlike. He was a very small, diminutive man. I think he was only about 5'7". So I guess most people kind of just saw him, oh, harmless. He's good around kids because he acts like one. So I guess I could see why they thought, oh, it's just Ed Gein. He's good with kids. He's like a kid, Of course, no one knew what was going on at his house. So I'm sure if they did, they probably would have rethought.
Didn't know what was going on inside his head.
Oh, that too.
And his family had come off to the community as this like very religious family with a strict home that were living on this farm. And so the whole community was very, very shocked by all this. And even after the trial and years later have suffered from this because that's what they're famous for now is Ed Gein.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that one of the police officers, I don't know 100% if this is correct or not, but I remember reading that one of the police officers, that was his mother. That was...
Yes, so that would Bernice Warden, she was his second victim in 1957. She was the owner of a hardware store. Her son was the deputy sheriff, and the reason he got caught with that one was because he was the last person there. They found a sales receipt with his name on it. So I believe he was caught the day of the murder, and they found her body decapitated that same day. So, yeah, it was.
Imagine how horrific that would be.
Yep, and they found out about the first murder of Mary Hogan, the tavern owner, in 1954, only because he admitted to killing her once he was arrested in 1957 for the murder of Bernice Warden. But they never recovered her body, but he did keep some of her body parts.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah. And he was a grave robber too.
Yes, he did say he preferred grave robbing. Again, it extremely awkward, shy. He didn't like confrontation. He saw the murders as more of a means to an end to do what he needed to do, which was he was trying to make this woman suit. So when bodies weren't readily available, he just kind of took the opportunity to kill these women who were older and who resembled his mother.
Yeah, and he also had admitted that once he did move on from doing the grave robbing to actually unaliving the women, that the skinning process, he enjoyed that more, or it was easier for him because the skin was moisturized and easier to work with.
So one of the things I remember reading about this guy, and I thought it was very interesting, is that he was schizophrenic. Supposedly, right? And I say supposedly because this is True Crime Paranormal, and I'm going to tell a short story about what I think, and it's my own personal experience. And if you're from Paranormal Roundtable, you probably know, you've already heard it. If you're not from Paranormal Roundtable, you probably haven't. But then again, I've been on lots of other shows and podcasts and channels and stuff, and I've actually talked about this a couple times. Not in a great deal extensively, but I'm going to get into that a little bit later, what I think could have been going on. But before we do that, let's get down to some more facts. I believe his early childhood had a lot to do with, of course, your formative years. I mean, that's the most important years of your life, really, because, I mean, it kind of shapes and sets a tone for the rest of your life. And his was pretty bad. Like I said, I don't know all the facts, but his dad, wasn't he like an alcoholic?
Oh, yeah. The dad was a heavy alcoholic, couldn't hold a job, had a dominant, just controlling wife. So he had just given up, and neighbors even described him as just a man who gave up and drank to cope, didn't have any kind of emotional attachment to his sons, basically just sat back and let his wife Augusta just make all the decisions and control everything, including them moving out to that farm and being completely isolated.
And moving out to the farm and isolating them, and then his father died. Right?
At the age of 66.
Yeah. How did he die?
That was ruled as heart failure due to alcoholism, was what the autopsy said.
So it wasn't anything that Ed did. Ed wasn't, pushing him down the stairs or...
No, it doesn't sound like it. If he did, it was probably because he'd been drinking too much and he fell on his own.
Yeah, so his dad basically died of natural causes.
How old would Ed have been when his dad passed?
Died, yeah.
34. And then his brother Henry, who's a few years older, was 39, I believe.
Wow, so his brother was 5 years older than him?
Mm-hmm.
So after his dad dies, and like I said, there's no malfeasance, wrongdoing on his part that caused that, But I remember reading that after his victims were exposed, there were all these different body parts, but most of them were supposedly from robbing graves. Yeah,
of recently buried women. He emphasized that he never meant to hurt anyone. He preferred grave robbing, but...
Well, that's nice of him.
Yeah, really, really lovely. What a nice, considerate man.
Yeah, he would look at the local newspaper so he would be able to find what graves resembled his mother.
Oh, that's right. Yes, so he that's why he chose Bernice and then the tavern keeper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and it was also something to do with there's a Freudian example of the saint and the Madonna.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the tavern worker, she was always drinking beers with everyone and making jokes and cussing. Mm-hmm. So she was like the Madonna. And then you had the hardware store who was a widow and who was a loving mother, and her son, was out hunting and just, beloved by the city.
So she would have been the Madonna, and the tavern keeper would have been the harlot, right?
The saint would have been the hardware keeper.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the Madonna would have been the tavern.
Okay, all right. So,
keeper.
Okay, I get it. I get what you're saying. So, and here's another thing too. After all of this came to light, the suspicion about his brother, and it was never proven, but supposedly there was a brush fire, and then they found his brother. What happened with that?
They were cleaning up marsh on their property. and the fire kind of got out of control. And then when Ed was looking, Henry, which was his brother's name, they couldn't find him. So when they finally did find him, he was already unalive down on the ground. The police had got there. They thought at first, originally, it was a heart attack. And so that was what it was ruled. And Ed, they called him Eddie. Oh, Eddie, innocent Eddie. They believed him. And then when later on down the road, they wound up doing the autopsy, when they were looking at him, they had found these weird bruisings on him, on the back of his head. And they had some suspicion of asphyxiation, like a choking, but then they had found all the smoke in his lungs, so then they wound up ruling it an accident. And I think Madeline had actually brought up a really good point with me about a previous conversation that they had with each other that was leading up to his death.
Yes, so Henry, despite having grown up under the same type of tyrant mother as Ed, he was very independent thinking. Like, as he got older, he started showing interest in women. His mother saw women as instruments of the devil, preached against sexual sin, death, damnation, like all that obsessively. And he talked about leaving the farm. He was kind of the buffer between Ed and their mother, Augusta, and he would encourage Ed to think independently. And for a religious fanatic like Augusta Gein, that would have made Henry a threat. So I think it's kind of very suspicious the way Henry died. And given the amount of control that she had over Ed, she would have never had to explicitly say, oh, you need to take out your brother. All it would have taken was for her to say, Henry's sinful, Henry's a danger, he's corrupt, he's evil, for it to get into Ed's head that, oh, he's a threat to this system that my mother has built, because Ed's identity was pretty much fused with his mother. So I personally, although obviously there's no evidence, it wasn't ruled a homicide, I believe Ed definitely had a hand in his brother's death and was likely pushed by his mother without even her having to say it explicitly. And I feel like that kind of became the moment for Ed Gein where he realized violence is permissible as long as it aligns with what mother says.
And when you look at this from a psychological aspect, the father, George, he had grown up with a very unstable family. He was orphaned from a very young age. His parents had died in a flooding of the Mississippi River. So he grew up very unstable, and so I think that's almost what drew him to Augusta, who grew up with this religious, strict, regulated family. And so bringing them together, he was looking for that stability, but it was a very tumultuous relationship. She probably picked him because she could wear the pants in the family, so to speak. And so Ed, from a very young age, was around this fighting and yelling and bickering and just beatings from the mother, and these religious scriptures thrown at him anytime he would do something wrong. She would tell him that girls were whores and of the devil. And so when the father had wound up passing away, it probably gave Ed maybe some more peace in the home. Instead of the regular beatings, when the husband would get home from being drunk at a bar and beat the mother, and then the mother would get down on her hands and knees and pray to God for his death.
Yeah, never a good thing when someone's praying to God for someone to die.
Nope. And the thing is, kind of going off of that, when Henry died, they said Augusta's reaction was just, she really didn't show any sadness or remorse, nothing. She just said, well, it's God's will. And she seemed pretty satisfied with that outcome because Henry was the one independently thinking for himself and showing interest in women, and his independence became a threat to this rigid moral system that she had built, because she was trying to teach them both that the outside world's dangerous, and Henry didn't buy into it, but Ed did.
Do you think that she set Ed, like pitted them against each other for sure, but do you think that she maybe set Ed up to kill Henry?
I think she did. I think her hold on Ed was so strong that she could communicate that without having to directly say it. All she had to do was just continue to drill into her head that your brother's evil, he's corrupted, he's a danger.
So she didn't have to go, kill him, Norman, she's a whore. That never came.
No, I mean, she just had Ed was just kind of like, I feel like he was like the muscle for her, because remember, she was a frail, sick old woman, and she had 2 sons, but Ed was kind of like her instrument. He really didn't have his own identity. His identity,
have his own will.
Nope, it was all fused with his mother.
He always wanted to please her, and he was always looking to tell her that he was being a good boy and trying to do what she wanted him to do. And I also want everyone to remember back to this point, when we get further down on in this case, is the state of confusion that Ed was in when the police arrived, and he couldn't remember where his brother was. He thought he saw him. What happened? He doesn't know. Just this state of confusion and haze that he was left in.
And his brother died in 1944, right? And I think it's odd. I mean, Ed wasn't that old, really. I mean, when his brother died.
Yeah, they were in their 40s.
40s.
Yep.
Yeah. Because his brother was born, 1905, right?
Ed Gein was born in 1906. And his brother's about 5 years older than him.
His brother was born in 1901, so he was 5 years older than him. Yeah, so he didn't, I mean, he would have been, 43 when he died? So Ed wouldn't have even been in his 40s yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, geez Louise. 38 years old?
Mm-hmm.
And then from that point on, he doesn't have anybody to kind of rein in his, because I really feel like, and there's not a ton of proof of this, but I've always thought about this case that his brother may have been kind of his conscience, and maybe once that conscience was destroyed.
Yep.
And he was one of those people who was able to compartmentalize things so that he could put that away into a box and then put the, how do you say it, like the transvestitism, has that the right word? Transvested, he dressing up as a woman and role playing as his mother, and then going out into public and being a normal person, or appearing as normal as possible.
Yeah.
Ed Gein, the caring, nurturing babysitter,
all
these different masks. And then he's actually wearing masks and dancing around by the light of the moon like a maniac.
Well, that, and the thing is, when he was interviewed, like, he didn't show any kind of remorse, but he didn't show pride either. To him, it was just like, well, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. He just kind of saw it as a task that needed to be completed, but he knew it would upset people. So it's not necessarily that he took enjoyment in it. He was very flat when being interviewed about it.
And it's weird too, because there's a character in movies too that is a part of this whole thing, and that's the Buffalo Bill character from Hannibal Lecter, the Hannibal whatever, Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the Lambs, yep. And
I said on my show on Paranormal Roundtable, I really don't like Hannibal Lecter just because it takes away from, I'm a big history buff and I like Hannibal Barca, the real the general. And so when the name Hannibal comes up now, it's always this fictional serial killer guy, but it's really, when you stop and you look at that, the way that Silence of the Lambs is written and done, if you stop and you look at now, and I know this is going to sound funny, I don't know how many people have analyzed this, because I have watched that movie a couple times, and it's Buffalo Bill's character, who is, they're in pursuit of him, right? But it's really Hannibal Lecter, and then in a way, he's playing the role of mother. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like the domineering, like, I'm in control, this whole game is mine. And, and Buffalo Bill is a culmination of Norman Bates and Leatherface. So it's kind of like Buffalo Bill is like the grandchild of the whole Ed Gein. Like, there was Ed Gein, and from him spun off psychological thriller, with Norman Bates and Psycho. And then from there, you got the physical aspect of the chainsaw wielding crazy Ed Gein in the flesh, wearing women's faces and things. And that was Leatherface. And then from there, you have this, and I really think that's kind of what Buffalo Bill was. He was a composite of those two people. A lot of people would just put him in there and say, well, he was just another Ed Gein version, whatever. But really, he was those two together. He was like Psycho and Ed Gein. Because if you see there's more of this psychological aspect to Buffalo Bill, even though he doesn't get a whole lot of screen time, you can see what he's doing. Like he's building that skin suit and he's doing it, but then he's being pursued by the mother figure, which I think to me, Clarice and Hannibal kind of together play that role. It's really, if you look into the mind of the person that wrote it, that is kind of what they're going for, in my opinion, because movies are always there's always an outer layer, and then there's this inner layer. And I know Stephen King is Dean Koontz, these people that write these books, Clive Barker, and if you look at there's always this inner meaning to them, inner and outer meaning. And I think that's what's going on with that. I do believe that was the whole goal, is to try to, but it's amazing how much spun off from him. And in this Netflix series, they tried to link Richard Speck, because they said, he's like, he was my hero, and I killed all these women. I don't really believe that. I think Richard Speck just killed those women because it was convenient to do at the time. And then, of course, when he goes to prison, the connection to Ed Gein is that, one, he killed multiple women, and then two, he dressed up as a woman because he got these breast implants and became a male prostitute in prison. And I thought that the Netflix series was pretty vulgar in the way that they have this graphic sex scene, which does not need to happen. It has no bearing on the show at all. And then they play this Jimi Hendrix music, to Richard Speck, like he's some kind of hero or something, and it's just, it kind of it dives into vulgarity in a way that doesn't really need to happen. But I think it was all part of just making you see, oh man, this was so depraved. The truth is, you didn't really need all of that extra nonsense in there to see how depraved he really was. All they really needed to do is just tell the true story of who this guy was and what he was. And it was just, I do like the aspects where they show the Leatherface, from Tobe, as the director of, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then they show Alfred Hitchcock, with the Psycho and all that. Those aspects were really well done. I think that was cool that they included that in there, And then, like I said, I still believe that Buffalo Bill was kind of a composite of those two, but I think that there was a deeper meaning there, and I think that this goes back to the mothering. A lot of people who go on to become serial killers, mass murderers, which are two different things, Mass murderers are people that go and they take someone, a group of people's lives in mass, like on a shooting or whatever, or even stabbing. There have been people who've done it in Asia, like just stab, 20 people, whatever, shooting people, whatever it is, however they do it, But this is a phenomena, and a lot of people like to say, well, it's a very American phenomenon. Not necessarily. Now, Gein may have been one of the most prominent, he wasn't even the earliest, because you had H.H. Holmes, and and then you had Albert Fish, who I think predated him too.
Oh yeah, he was. Oof.
Yeah, and so you had these ridiculous people, and then, but I do think he was very notorious for what he did, and it was so depraved. But yeah, as far as adding all this extra drama to it didn't really need to happen.
No, and Ed Gein wasn't even a serial killer in the modern sense, because as far as we know, he was only directly tied to 2 murders. And even if you look at those, they were both shot with guns. So it was a quick killing. There was no prolonging of torture or anything. He didn't take pleasure in it. Nothing about it was sexualized. It was, to Ed, it was just a means to an end to make this woman suit to become his mother that he became obsessed with.
And a lot of these people have screwed up moms and dads, and or they some of them were not raised at all. I mean, they just had horrible upbringings, or they were abused by people, and then in turn they become the abuser or whatever it is that they. And I don't buy into all that either. Like, people will say, well, they were treated this way and that, so then they treated people poorly based on whatever. Bull crap. I mean, like, to me, it's like I don't buy into that, because I was treated pretty poorly, and I know a lot of people who were, and they didn't go off and try to make a suit of a woman.
Well, I mean, again, look at his older brother, Henry. They were both raised the same by the same mother, and he was the independent thinker. He even encouraged his brother to think for himself. He talked about leaving. He was that buffer that kind of, in a way, protected Ed and tried, to uplift him and encourage him to be more independent. And once his brother died under mysterious circumstances, Ed lost that, and now all he had was his mother, who, I mean, at that point, I feel like most of the damage was done, but now she just had complete and total control with no one there to correct her.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Rain.
Well, I think
okay, yeah,
there's
an
aspect to it from a psychology. It's that age-old question: is it nature or is it nurture? But I'd like to enter in something else. Is it nature? Is it nurture? Or is it spiritual?
Or could be, a kernel of all three. I mean, and I do talk about that often, is the mind, body, spirit connection, and how they're all connected, and how we are really just different aspects, of these three things: the mind, body, and spirit. I think that's it's very important to look at this case from that standpoint. Interesting, when he went into the place where he got locked up, it was a mental institution, right? He began, I guess, sort of a new life there, and I wonder about that, because that's where he was really diagnosed with the schizophrenia and all of that. And I wonder how much of that could have been. Now, this is where the paranormal part comes in, because we have a recording of them when they were interviewing this guy. And it sounds very interesting. I don't know what you guys think, but I mean, maybe we could play it and then you guys could tell me, because it's a very weird thing.
Yes. So the crimes happened. Maddie had touched on how he was discovered. Nobody believed it. Eddie did that. He was having dinner at his neighbor's house when he was arrested. And so for 10 years, he had went away to the mental institution until he was able to stand trial. Now, when he did stand trial, I don't know if they still are allowed to do this today, but back then in Wisconsin, they had a thing which was called a split trial. So he was tried for the unalivings and found guilty. And then they tried him for his plea of insanity, and they granted that to him. And so instead of going to prison for the rest of his life, he was sent to the psych ward mental institution where, like you said, he had a new life. According to the nurses that were around him, he was a normal patient. He never acted out. They never had any issues with him. He liked to talk about the weather. One nurse did notice that the scene from Psycho, when he was sitting in front of the TV, stuck with her, because she goes, "That's Ed." And so, getting back to these recordings, when he was interrogated by the police after he had first got arrested, I think that's where the spiritual and the paranormal aspect really starts to stick out to me. Now, people, when you listen to these tapes, and if you'd like to go listen to them, you're welcome to, it sounds like he's a child. He's answering it very childlike. He's answering these questions, very short, 2-word sentences sometimes, but very helpful to the police. And it sounds like he's trying to figure out why this happened and these horrible things along with the interrogator. They would ask him, what did you do with the woman's private parts? And he's like, oh, I put them away in a box, and they're like, oh, well, why did you make this knife, this filed knife? And he goes, honestly, I don't know why I made the knife when I made it. Like, he's trying to figure out why these things are happening. They ask him about the shooting. He doesn't remember, and he actually asks the interrogator if the police could go check his weapon at home and see if he even shot from that weapon. He can't recall. He's having this haze, this confusion because he was doing these horrific crimes. They get into the grave robbing, and he even admits that on one of the grave robbings that he realized what he was doing, and he was in a state of confusion, and he just covered the woman up and left because he knew it was wrong. He didn't understand why he was doing it. And he didn't seem mad or angry during this interrogation. The only thing that he really seemed to show any emotion about was he was explaining to the interrogator that the officer that he had talked to the day before, that he was telling him, I don't know why I did this. I don't remember. That's what he didn't understand. And so we'll get into the clip that Josh had mentioned. And I just think this is such a weird timing that this recording would pick that up. And you have to remember, this is in the 50s. They didn't have AI in all these ways to manipulate, recordings like they do now. So he's asked the question, what were you going to do with these bodies?
Thank you for that, Raina. I want to say something now before we play this recording. I want to talk about something that happened. There is it's a former nursing home, and it was one of our accounts for years. And I actually started working there long before I had my own company, and we have a security company. And Anthony, you've worked there, and we've all had something kind of weird happen to us there. I can say this, it became a place for homeless people to go and get a new start, to start over or whatever. And there was a really bad energy there. Now, this is not a former retirement home. This is a former nursing home where a lot of people did die. And then they, like I said, they converted it into like a homeless shelter, but not really a shelter. Like they had their own little apartments that used to be the rooms of the elderly. I don't really like rest homes, nursing homes, Now, we've guarded a couple different retirement homes, and there was some weird things that went on in those places, and I can get into that a little bit. But here is the one that happened at a place down in South Austin. I guess we won't say the name of it just because, but I remember there being, and a lot of homeless people, and there's a lot of homeless people here in Austin where we're at, but there was one that was there, and a lot of these people, I think they have mental illness, There was one named Oscar that was there, and I was told by David, the overnight guy that worked there with me, who was like the tech that took care of, the day-to-day, whatever, checking people in and stuff like that. And they had to have their ID. They could only have one guest, and they had to leave by 11, I think, at night or something. There's all these rules. And there was this area where they called it the Star, where all the other hallways kind of shot off from that spot. And there was like a library in there. So I would go in there and I would like read magazines and stuff because they had like all kinds of books and magazines and stuff, but hardly anybody took time to read them or do anything. And so I was sitting there reading a magazine, and Oscar was sitting there across from me. And then there was this little round table in between us, and he was talking to himself. And of course they had told me, they said, be careful for him. He's schizophrenic. And they were actually in the process of trying to find a way for the mental health people to get him removed because they thought that he hadn't been violent yet. And I have to say, he wasn't violent in the time that I was there. I did hear that something did happen with him after I had left, but I was sitting there reading this magazine and I heard this voice. It was him obviously pleading with something. I don't know what at that point. And I, had the magazine up in front of my face because I didn't want to just sit there and have Oscar staring at me, like 7-8 feet away from me, just staring at me, and I'm like, okay. And he had moved his chair forward a little bit, and I was like, okay, this is getting, you're invading my AO here, And then I heard a deep, guttural, kind of gravelly voice, and I was like, what the heck was that? And so at first I just thought it was him talking to himself and changing his voice. And I thought, man, this guy really is messed up. He's got some problems. So I lowered the magazine and I stared at him. And I noticed, like, it happened. It wasn't like real quick. Like, it happened a couple times. Like, he would go, please stop, please. And then his mouth would stop moving and I would hear the other voice. And you would, unless he was into ventriloquism, he was very good at it. He was just several feet away from me. And I have, that I'm farsighted, So I can see things from like 7-8 feet away. It's like perfect distance. I can see it just fine. There's no there's no blurred vision there, And when I was younger, I had like hardly any eye problems at all. Like I could see perfectly clear and I could hear pretty good. So just letting you know, like I was physically, whatever. So I was staring at this guy and I was like, what the heck, And I was like, and then I thought, did I just imagine that? So I was about to lift the magazine back up. I believe it was like a Texas Monthly or something, and it happened again. But this time it wasn't just some unintelligible thing. It was like an argument. And it was like, no, like, and this thing said no, and then began to bark, whatever it was. And it was, like I said, it wasn't like you couldn't understand it. It just said, it was just like you could tell there was a conversation happening. But you couldn't understand every word. But it was not like it was just like a brr. No, it was like there was clearly there were words being said. And I just thought, and so it just shocked me, and I was sitting there, I was looking at this, and this thing, if I remember, it just said something like, no, you listen to me. Like, I think that's what it was saying, something like that. And like I said, it was clear that there was a conversation happening. You could see it. And at this point, there were tears coming off of his face. I'll never forget this. And he was very unkept, unclean guy. You could see that he was very disheveled. He hadn't had a haircut in a while. And I just remember him looking down and looking at his hands, and he had his fingers open and he was like pushing them into each other, like going back and forth. And I was just looking at this guy, and I felt so bad for this guy because at that moment I knew 100% that this was demonic spiritual oppression. This was not schizophrenia. Now, maybe it was schizophrenia by the clinical definition, but what was causing the schizophrenia was open for debate. Like, was it his mental breakdown? But it was open for debate only in the way that, was he already schizophrenic and then this demonic entity, was what I would call it, attached itself to him and caused this? Or was it the demonic entity that caused the schizophrenia is what I'm getting at. You know what I mean? And so I often wondered about that guy, and I just got up and just, and I felt my skin crawl, and I felt like there was something pressing on my spine. Knowing what I know now about the paranormal and about cryptids and alien abduction, everything we cover on the show, I know that that's something trying to attach to your spine. And thank goodness I was grounded, and I was like, God help me, in the name of Christ, I rebuke you. I said it in my breath. And as I heard that gravelly, guttural voice, and it just at that point it was kind of unintelligible. I couldn't make out the words. I was just walking away. But it was cursing me, and I could hear it being aggressive, and I just thought in my mind, I was like, this thing is cursing at me, Like I said, I couldn't understand all the words, but I knew that that's what that was, And then he got up and he walked toward the north hallway, and I was walking down the south hallway, the main artery of the place, going back into the control room. When I got back to the control room, David, who was watching me on camera, he says, "Yeah, you met Oscar," and I'm like, "Yeah." And I didn't know what David's thoughts were, but this guy was very spiritually gifted, if I could just call it that. And there were some other things that went on. I'm not going to get into it on the show. But he was like, he goes, so you saw it, huh? You heard it. I said, seen what? And he said that something was talking to him. His mouth wasn't moving. Like David knew. And I said, yeah. And I heard, he goes, you heard it, didn't you? I said, yeah. And he goes, yep. They say that guy is schizophrenic. He goes, but there's more going on there. And then we began to get into a whole thing. And he was into, it's kind of a strange thing. He was Christian. And a lot of people are going to say in the comment section, you can't be both. But he was Buddhist by philosophy. So he was a Christian follower of Christ by religion, but a Buddhist philosophy, And he also was very, not just spiritually in tune, I wouldn't call it that. I would say very intelligent guy, very smart. And he told me, he was like, yeah, dude, he goes, there's a few people in here that are like that. And later on, there was actually a guy that I met and I worked with. There was a Serbo-Croatic guard that I ended up working at a retirement home with because something really weird happened at that place. But we can get into that at another time. But I think these places are a breeding ground for that, especially when you have these mentally ill homeless people there. And I think that when Ed went into this facility where he was at, I think that it probably intensified, because he had no outlet for it. So there's no telling. I mean, if they would have known what we know now, but even with what we know now, people are still not going to go into the spiritual aspect of this. But I think if they would just have had people that we have now, there'd be more people going and interviewing him and maybe interviewing him from the standpoint of the spiritual side of this. Because I know another person from Wisconsin, very famous, that killed a lot of people, unalived a lot of people, Jeffrey Dahmer. And when he was in prison, he became very close with the chaplain and he supposedly accepted Christ and everything. And I've always thought, man, it would be something to be able to interview these people, and not because I want them to be celebrities or to glamorize or, idolize, for damn sure. Not going to do that. And their deeds and whatever. But to figure out and get to the root causes of what could be at play here with their mental illnesses, because I think the mental illness is one of two things. It's either the spiritual attachments come because of the mental illness, or the mental illness is caused by it. You know what I mean? It's like a snake eating its own tail thing. And I think that this, there are these 72 goetic demons, as they call them. And this is from the Goetia. And if anybody knows what that is, and it's in the Kabbalah. And I don't practice that or whatever, but I've read it. I understand what it is. And it's the lesser key of Solomon. The 72. Now, it begins with these different demons, and we covered the Gypsy Rose case. Myself and Nellie and Madeline and Anthony. We all, and then we were on with Blondes and Booze, another show. It's a paranormal show, and then
BMR,
Bigfoot Michigan Rob, who does predominantly cryptids and stuff. Good friend of mine does storytelling. Check those channels out. So we did a 3-parter, and we had the middle part. And I know that I got into it about the third demon, the third goetic demon, which is really, they're not demons, they're archons. They're the rebellious angels that fell after a war with God. And that was Visago, who I think played a very big part, him and his legions. In the Gypsy Rose case, we're not going to get into a whole thing about that. But I do believe that there is something to this that needs to be explored further, because each one of these archons or demons, whatever you want to call them, they have a job that they do. I don't think they all work together, though. I just think that they each found a niche, like germs, And I have my own theories about it. And so I think that as we move along on this show and it advances, I think it's going to do good for people to listen and maybe learn about what these things are and what these, how they operate, what their purpose is and how they feed on us. Because I think that's what it is them taking energy. And so that's my take on that. But let's play the clip. Go ahead and play it, and let's see. And you can hear this. It's like an EVP while they're interviewing Ed Gein.
What did you intend to do with their body, Mr. Warden?
So what you're listening to is a laugh. It's a disembodied laugh, and it's not Ed that's actually laughing on there. And it's a very strange thing. And so you hear this laughter coming from that, and where does it come from? And I mean, having dealt with some schizophrenic people, I had one on my property who I felt really terrible for the guy. He was on one of our properties that we did security for years ago, down off Congress. You worked there.
Yeah.
I think you know which one I'm talking about. He used to be on, he would come on that property, and the property was being remodeled. And I remember him, and he would come on to the property, and he would just want to find a place to sleep, and it was wintertime, and I would always tell him, I'd be like, look, you're not supposed to be on this property, but it was such a weird property the way it was laid out, and I would sometimes just let him sleep away from everybody in this little cove, little niche right there, and then me, Anthony, or D or Scorpion, those are the guys we worked with, would wake him up and tell him to go before 5 o'clock, and then he would go because it was cold. I felt bad for him. But it started to become very obvious that he had schizophrenia of some kind because you never knew what you were going to get. Sometimes he'd be really cool, and then other times he would be kind of nasty and mean, not really to us, but to himself. Like he would pull on his hair and say things, and then one day he just looked at me and Scorpion, looked dead in our eyes, and just told us, he was like, I have schizophrenia. And then he told me on another occasion with another guard that he not only was he schizophrenic, but that he had been possessed. So when you look at that, I don't know whatever happened to the guy. I mean, that was years ago.
That was a long time ago.
Golly, that was a long time ago. So I don't know whatever happened to that guy. That's going on 20 years. But like, just the guy it was a sad thing, And there were only about 6 residents there at that time. They were filling it back up. And one of those residents was this Romanian guy. And he told me, he said, man, that guy's possessed. And when he said he's possessed, this is interesting. This is what this guy said. And maybe just because he's Romanian, I don't know. But he said that guy's possessed of a vampire. And at the time, back then, I didn't really think of like vampire, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, with all the work we've done on Paranormal Roundtable, like your guy, okay, yeah. Because one of those goetic demons, the original Orneus, he was the one that was attacking Solomon's, who is the son of David, King David, if you know the Bible. He was attacking Solomon's servant's son, and he got caught drinking the blood from his foot. And then that's one of the versions of it. There's multiple versions, but that's the prevailing version. And he was cast out because God gave Solomon a ring and said, here, use this ring to, capture and enslave these archons. And that's what they were, archons. And he did. And then all of their legions that went along with them. And some of these, I think Visago has like 26 legions. And if you do the math, a Roman legion being 6,000, that comes out to
156,000.
Yeah. So, yeah. So it's really mind-boggling, like, and it's funny because like it says that it calls them legions, right? And of course, when Jesus, in the Greek translations in particular, and I mean, it says we are legion, we are many, and I think whenever these demons are cast out, and I did a show once about the Brazilian exorcist. That one above all the others gave me the creeps because I was in here in the studio by myself at one point, and we were doing the interview, and there were so many weird noises and things that happened during and after that. And after that, I was like, new rule, I'm not going to be by myself. But then I still came up here by myself several other times. But then I was like, okay, it got really weird up here. Like a lot of stuff started happening. And then I think the first time that after that one, that Anthony, when you came up here, we heard that crackling, popping noise coming out.
Yeah, I remember that.
Golly. And ever since then, every time we do a show, we hear stuff, we see stuff, I once saw a full-bodied apparition in here in the studio.
And Tony did too.
Well, that thing Tony saw, yeah.
Tony saw a demon. Like, it looks just like a demon or something. But thank goodness we're not letting it attach itself to us and running around and trying to make a skin suit, because that would really be that's when you got some problems, when you're just like, I'm not Buffalo Bill over here, but
time to go talk to someone at that point.
Yeah, maybe you should get some help, but not to make light, but this is, it's such a dark subject, but I really think it's something that needs to be explored, because I think that these entities attach to these people. And here's another thing, and I don't know if people have thought of this, but Madeline, you made the point during the pregame before the show that he had all these women's body parts.
Oh, yeah. When detectives went to the Gein farmhouse, I mean, even the most seasoned one there were just horrified by what they saw. I mean, bowls made from human skulls, like furniture reupholstered with human skin. He had a belt made of nipples and lampshades. It was really horrifying. The place was just in a state of decay, but his mother's room was like a shrine. He completely preserved that. That was probably the only part of the house that was, kept, just in pristine condition. So it just makes me wonder, just imagine the activity that was going on in that house, even if it's not
paranormal activity.
Yes, the paranormal, even if it's not officially documented, you can't tell me he didn't have weird experiences.
Well, and that was the thing. There was a guy that once told me, and we were at a paranormal conference with you guys. It was the one we went to San Antonio. One of the conferences, and me and Anthony, we've been to a bunch of them, but I was talking to, I'm trying to remember who it was that I was talking to. I don't know if it was, I don't want to say his name if that wasn't him. So I can't remember. It was a guy. And his table was right next to, I think it was next to Krista and Brandy. That's from Blondes and Booze. He's a heavyset guy, but we were talking, and there was another guy that walked up with a British accent, and they were talking about the activity in this particular location that they were doing investigations, and it was just something as innocuous as like somebody's coffins had been moved, right? And there was this heavy activity, and even pictures of these apparitions. And so you can imagine, but there was this guy that was there, and he was saying that he knew a guy that was locked up with Dahmer. And, this could just be, but then again, we did cover with Anna Choate. She's covered not only the John Wayne Gacy property, but then she's covered Fox Hollow Farms, and she came on our show on Paranormal Roundtable with those properties of Fox Hollow Farms and tons of EVPs. But this guy said that Dahmer saw spirits like regularly, like of the people that he had unalived, and that sometimes he would see spirits that, that weren't whatever, because he believed that doing what he did caused these entities, you know what I mean? So imagine the nightmare, and he was constantly praying, trying to make them go away. And this guy supposedly was locked up with him in county before he, so he was already trying to pray, I guess. Yeah. But by his own admission, he built a satanic altar, Dahmer did. And we could get into him eventually too. But, back to Gein, I can only imagine what he was going through with his mental state being what it was already fractured. And, and we talked about on our show with Sean, we called it the Shaunicles, because he had all these, and he was talking about we got into this whole thing about the reptilian and how he was, it was his past life or whatever.
Yeah, like his higher self.
His higher self being a connection of this reptilian, and that's what he said, but he said that he was grounded in Christ, but he saw a past life where it was weird, where where he was like this reptilian, right? And that the other reptilians didn't like that, so he was killed. He was murdered, right? Well, and folks, if you haven't heard, it is really compelling. It was one of the Friday drops we do where we interview a guest every Friday, and he was one of our guests, Sean. And one of the things that we got into on one of those episodes was the fractal soul. And what I mean by that is you have your higher self, your soul, then you have like these fractals of it, which are kind of like little zip drives. So like this life, if you believe in reincarnation, this would be like, and if you don't, you don't. If you do, you do. But it helps explain a lot, But each life is like you're just getting information like on a little zip drive and taking it back to the higher self or the soul matrix. And eventually that soul matrix is complete, and then you go back to the source, which is God, the Father of Christ. Now, that's saying, hey, this is what really could be happening. And in between there, though, there's all these different realities and pocket realities and whatever, and these entities can take you to these pocket realities. With Gein, and I'm going to say this, and I really believe this, I think that he was being taken by whatever these demonic forces or fallen angels, rebellious angels, whatever, take your pick. Those are three different things, but they're all evil, right? They attach to him and they take him into this pocket reality where he does whatever misdeeds he does. And then when he comes back, they dump you off and you're just kind of like, you're like an alien abductee. You know that something happened. And there's even people who have claimed on the witness stand, true crime people who have committed horrible crimes. And then they'll say, I was out of my body watching it happen. Well, what was piloting your body? Something was making you bludgeon your husband or wife to unalive them, or worse, God forbid, children or whatever it is that they're doing these things to people. I know not in my hometown, but the town I used to live in when I was young, there was this guy who got busted and he had unalived like 6 dogs. And it wasn't all at one time. And one of them, I believe, was my sister's because he just died. And my dad thinks that he drank antifreeze, and we couldn't prove it. And then there was this guy that was always wandering around, and he was a handyman. And he would knock on my door. And my mom always said, that guy gives me the creeps, And my mom was one of those mean Hispanic moms who she would have beat his ass, But he was like this little kind of, hey, I'm just in the neighborhood. And I remember my dad saying one time he saw the guy walking down the road with a jug of antifreeze.
Oh, jeez.
And then, of course, my sister's dog gets, unalive, just dies. And then there were several cats that passed away. And then eventually the guy got caught because he tried to unalive. He got caught unaliving my neighbor down the road, Zachary. There was his family from Australia. And that guy used to work at the power plant with my dad. And he got caught doing something to his dog. And then... And now I don't even remember what it was. My parents didn't tell me what it was because they were like, oh, no, you don't need to hear all this. And we never could prove that he did that to our dog. And he basically got a slap on the wrist. Like he did I think 2 months in jail or something.
Of course.
Yeah. And then was allowed to just go out, whatever. And then years and years later, he was living I think in Louisiana or something. I was talking to my friend Mickey that, I've been still to this day. We told his story of that gargoyle-like thing when he was running bleachers in high school. We were in elementary together. We stayed friends forever. And he listens to the show sometimes, the Paranormal Roundtable. And he was talking about that guy. And he goes, you remember that prick that was killing everybody's dogs? And I was like, yeah. He's like, well, he killed his wife. Yeah. Over in Louisiana, in a parish in Louisiana. And Mick couldn't find the article or whatever. And this was back in the late 90s, early 2000s when he told me. And so we didn't just go run and jump on the internet and then solve all the mysteries of the universe, You had to go find some newspapers and stuff, And he goes, I'll find the newspaper for you. I'll send it to you. He was talking to me and my brother. And about that time, that was when me and my brother were getting into the exploration of the Devil's Backbone and getting into the whole paranormal thing. And we got into what we call Dogman and Bigfoot, which is, these cryptids and now here we are doing the True Crime Paranormal. And if you're here to just hear about Ed Gein and his crimes and all that, there's a ton of channels and places you can go to hear about that. We're here because we want to talk about how this ties into, the real reality, as we call it. On PRT, we always say, welcome to the PRT, which is Paranormal Roundtable. PRT, join us in the real reality. To me, this is the real reality. What caused Ed Gein to do what he did? We know what he did, but why did he do it? We know what Jeffrey Dahmer did. It was horrible, but why did he do it? And there again, the guy that was at the Paracon with us, he could have just been talking out of his bunghole. You know what I mean? Like, we don't know for sure that this guy knew somebody that was locked up with Dahmer, but I will say this for him. That's not the first time I've heard that. There was a guy interviewed out of El Paso. I'm sorry, it was Van Horn. Well, it's close enough. It's on the way to El Paso, but I interviewed him. That was the guy that saw the weird thing underneath the bridge. I don't know if y'all remember that one. And he was a Hispanic guy, and he got into the whole serial killer thing. And we were talking about how Richard Ramirez was from El Paso and had gone to his high school, before. He's like, yeah, I went to the same high school as Richard Ramirez. And somehow we ended up on the subject of Jeffrey Dahmer. And he said, yeah, man, there was a guy that was locked up with him that said that Dahmer was haunted by his victims and that he was shaken out of bed and all this stuff. I mean, and we can get into that eventually, like I said, but that's the point I'm making, though, is that like what Madeline said, before the show, you were talking about how imagine the activity, right? Like, dude, I mean, that's, yeah. If you were these people, can you imagine John Wayne Gacy? Like, you had all those people stuffed under your floorboards in the crawl space, dude. And he's like, then he writes a book, A Question of Doubt. And I was like, I'm questioning why you would even write a book and be that stupid, and then he goes, the idea that I'm some kind of homosexual thrill killer is just preposterous. He was on an interview saying that. And I said, maybe because they found 36 people under your floorboards. It's like, come on, dude. Not to laugh, but I'm laughing about him being so ridiculous. But I am 100% sure when he became Pogo that he was entertaining something.
Oh, yeah.
And now, of course, we had Guy Anderson, we interviewed him, and we were talking about the whole, the clowns and how the Nephilim, we got into that a little bit. And there's a guy that wrote a book. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but people have been clamoring for me to interview him. But he talked about how the Nephilim might have used like a type of paint to cover their faces, to hide their true form, and that's just a weird thing, and we can get into all kinds of stuff. Folks, as this show progresses, you're going to hear all kinds of things. I mean, but that's what we're doing here is this True Crime Paranormal. It's focused on true crime and paranormal. So that's it for tonight, folks. Thank you for tuning in to True Crime Paranormal. I got to get used to saying that. True Crime Paranormal, our first episode. I thought it went well. Maybe you think it did. Maybe you think it didn't. But leave your opinions in the comment section and tell us what you want to hear. If there are certain cases that you want to hear about that we can cover, because I know a lot about a lot of these different cases, and so does Rain, and so does Maddie. Something that you guys are really into because y'all are weird and twisted. And that's okay. I forgive you. I just didn't know if my neurologist feels the same way. But anyways, I'm just kidding. That's between you and God. You hear that, Maddie?
Well, it's actually a thing women seem to be into is true crime. A lot of women.
It's your soul. So.
Yeah, it's your soul that's going to burn in hell, not mine.
Oh, well, as you know, women, we're all just instruments of the devil, or at least that's what Augusta Gein would say.
Yeah, according to Augusta Gein, they're all evil.
Except for me, because God chose me.
But so we'll be back next week, same time next week on Saturday, and we'll be there for, I guess, the continuation of this whole thing about Ed Gein, kicking off our first, I guess, case that we're studying and diving into. And we're going to get deep into some stuff on this next episode. We'll see you there. Good night.
Body now night.